Hello, and welcome to our Visualizing Theory final project presentation on historical particularism by Morgan Cockman, Shelby Daines, Paul Martineau, and Joe North. In 1873, Edward Burnett Tyler, also known as the founder of cultural anthropology, wrote the book Primitive Culture. His theories in this book created the movement for cultural evolutionism, which was widely popular in the 19th century. This theory states that cultural development was essentially the same among all races and peoples, but occurred at different rates and from different pressures, which Tyler termed survivals. Survivals can be explained as practices that society still partakes in, which are carried along by force of habit, even though they serve little to no function in the present day. This idea that culture evolved from a homogeneous source was eventually regarded as not only impossible to prove, but also failed to identify the uniqueness of each culture and their history. Franz Boas, also known as the father of American anthropology, began to advocate for viewing the development of a group's culture as particular to that group's unique history and experiences. Instead of groups developing culture in the same unilineal way, this theory stated that groups could reach cultural development through many different paths. Boas believed that only by direct ethnographic data collection and individual study could there be an understanding of various societies. Thus, historical particularism was born, though was not given its modern name until 1960 by Marvin Harris. Historical particularism as a movement gained popularity after works by Boas published in the 1920s became celebrated in the anthropological community. It remained the dominant theory throughout the first half of the 20th century. Boas spent an extensive period of time in northern Canada with the peoples of Baffin Island, where he transitioned from geographer to anthropologist. Later, he pursued a career in academia, which eventually led him to developing the anthropology department at Columbia University. There he spread his teachings and became a mentor to many individuals who would become famous names in the anthropological discipline. Students such as Margaret Mead, Edward Sapir, A.L. Kroeber, and Ruth Benedict further developed the field of historical particularism by revealing the details and specifics of societies around the world, while also building theoretical and practical frameworks that can still be applied today. In class, we focused on Margaret Mead's work, Coming of Age in Samoa, which along with Boas's teaching, found that development of youth is particular to the culture they are raised in, such that an American youth and a Samoan youth would have completely different difficulties and ideas about their own youth. To represent historical particularism, our group created a video which shows the anthropological community's ideas on how culture developed transition from unilineal evolutionism to historical particularism.
Today we will be presenting a visual representation of the cultural concept of historical particularism. So before historical particularism, we had the idea of unilineal evolutionism. Anthropologists like Sir Edward Tyler believed in this construct of culture, which supposes that nations can be described using a general average based on uniformity that allows for classification of specific stages of the development of culture. This development progresses from primitive to modern, or simple to complex. This shapes the idea that cultures are homogeneous, so each group has the same culture, it just exists in different stages. The visual thus presents four distinct groups, and even though each group is so different, they have the same generic, uniform, gray culture. But this is not the idea we're looking for. Instead, we have the idea of historical particularism, which was created by Franz Boas. This concept advocates for the uniqueness of each culture. So here we see that each culture is treated individually, as each group has their own history composed of particular developments and experiences that are distinctive to that culture. Culture is therefore particular to each culture group. It is not uniform nor general. With our visual, you now see that each group is matched to their specific, unique concept of culture. Gone is the generic homogeneous gray culture, and in its place are four distinct visual representations of particular cultures: a blue circle, an orange star, a green square, and a pink heart. This thus represents historical particularism.
We believe this visual representation of historical particularism not only represents the change in popular beliefs about how culture develops, but also the importance of treating cultures as individual entities. Each group has their own history composed of particular developments and experiences which are distinctive to that culture group. This then changes how their culture developed and continues to evolve. We decided to create a video because we wanted to be able to show the general consensus in the anthropological community on how culture develops by moving from unilateral evolutionism to historical particularism. We used the literal movement of on-screen items such as canceling out the gray culture and changing it to colored and shaped culture to give a visual idea of how a culture's development matches the uniqueness of its people. To create this piece, we first collaborated over email to generate ideas for how this process could be shown visually, while also being restricted to using forms of digital media since our group could not collaborate in person due to social distancing. None of us are particularly skilled in producing digital media, so when Morgan introduced the idea of recording a PowerPoint, we eagerly agreed. Morgan sent us a prototype of a recording of the PowerPoint, which we decided needed a voiceover to fully explain the concept. Morgan was able to use the essay which Joe and Paul co-wrote and was edited by Shelby to aid the visual. Finally, after both the video and essay were finalized and approved by the group, Shelby created a presentation which incorporated both the essay and the visual aspect to create a holistic view of the history and significance of historical particularism and how that was represented in our visual production. Thank you for taking the time to view our work, and we hope that our collaborative efforts have fully explained and visualized historical particularism.